Hello, my name is Tanisha J, and welcome back to Cosmic Roots Alchemy. This Cosmic Roots Alchemy is where we read ancestral natal charts. This is where the cosmic code of the day that you were born, and we read the sacred blueprint that the ancestors left to speak to us, to guide us, navigate our journey in this life. Today, we are going to navigate MalcolmX, or as some know him, Malik El-Shabazz. He was born May 19th, 1925 at 10:25 p.m. in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, I'm going to give you a little small history because I think everyone knows about Malcolm X and who he was and what he stood for. However, this chart is going to give you somewhat of the detail and the energy that he came into this earth with, of his cosmic assignment, his soul assignment. And the first thing we're going to do, we're going to begin with the first house. Now, you know, the first house is the soul's arrival, of how the soul comes into the lineage, how the soul has come into the ancestral generation. And his first house, he has Jupiter in Capricorn, and also Fortune and South Node in Aquarius. Now, as I imagine, I always tell you guys, each house with its placements is a conversation that is happening. It is a conversation that is happening to help lead, guide us of what the ancestors were whispering to us and helping us to move forward in our journey. If you see me look back and forth, remember I have my notes with my computer here about the no comments and everything of the natal chart. Now, the one thing I want you to know is that Malcolm came in with a assignment. He didn't come in just wavering, trying to figure out. His assignment was heavy. He has Jupiter in Capricorn. Jupiter, I always put as the ancestral wisdom keeper archetype. And Capricorn, we all know, falls in with the duty in service and discipline. So therefore, he came in with a lineage who had already were builders, who were survivors, who had already been here and lived through some very hard stuff that possibly you and I could have not imagined. Now, I want to explain Jupiter and Capricorn a little bit more. Like I said, it is the wisdom keepers, the builders and expanders who abundance was never measured in material inheritance. The abundance was knowledge. And with Capricorn, that knowledge was earned, structured, and disciplined through the lived experience of impossible conditions, of not inherited privileges either. And with that foundation leads you to the conversation between South Node Aquarius and Fortune in Aquarius. Now, in the South Node in Aquarius is stating to Malcolm in his chart that it's okay to be a rebel, but don't be a rebel, a self-led rebel who burns in his own flame, who is lost in this isolation and is not, and just is leading recklessly. Because Fortune comes in and say, I need you to be a more collective, community bound, build a structure. And that's more in alignment if you're building a structure with community, if you're building a structure and discipline with that Capricorn, for that flame to become a controlled flame and a focused flame of a force that is Malcolm X. Now, as we move into the second house is Uranus in Pisces. Now, to me, Uranus, again, I always say Uranus is the ancestral archetype of the awakener. The awakener who comes in, like I said, with that staff and hits the ground, that hits that foundation and breaks that foundation away for truth to rise, for stories, for and especially with Pisces, that disillusionment, that lie. So the Uranus comes to say, okay, we're going to remove this disillusion, this lie that they have set up in front of our face, and bring out the truth. Now, the truth in what Malcolm was talking about was about what was sold to us. What was sold to us, as in we would live in the conditions that the United States government, what they were stating was structured and was good and sufficient enough for us. And with the Malcolm ancestral lineage, they were like, we're not going to be a part of that oppression. We're not standing for that. And we know better. We know we can do better. And this is also, I'm going to be speaking about Malcolm's mother, Miss Louise Little. She was very much so a power force in Malcolm, and what we see in what's happening along with his father, Earl Little. So in the second house, this is where we see Louise Little in the Uranus and Pisces intersection. Because she was a woman, she knew her spiritual truth, she knew Black sovereignty, she knew Black truth, and she knew Black worth. And these were the things that were not granted by the system. These were the things she knew we as a community, a Black community, had to build upon on our own. And both Malcolm mother and father believed in that, because they were very so much heavy in the movement with heavy in the movement when Malcolm was younger. And as we go for that, she raised her children in that same consciousness of what it was, the importance of knowing your worth, of who you are, and not your worth being given by someone else or being defined by someone else. So when Uranus and Pisces come into that placement, they're having that conversation. That conversation was heavily employed by his parents, of his parents stating, no, this is not who you are. This is not where we are from. This is not where we began. We are definitely defined by what we know and the truth of who we are and the consciousness of who we are. They were not accepting anyone else's structure, definition of who they were. And as that goes into it, as that inheritance of smartness, of that inheritance of Black sovereign, of who Black was, who we were as a community and people, and what we deserve, we go into the third house. The third house is soul's voice. This is about communicating. And this is about the voice no longer being silent, because we're talking. And in that soul house, we have Chiron in Aries. Chiron is the wound that is supposed to be the medicine. And in Aries, the wound is ancestral rage. And being that the wound is ancestral rage, is about ancestral rage that was silenced. It was about the ancestral rage, not just to Malcolm, but the ancestral lineage, the family lineage, of where they were not able to speak. They were not able to communicate the truth of what was truly going on at that point. And as I read that, I'm thinking about like the not only the beginnings, but even during that time, it was such a time where even just speaking about the truth and telling the truth also was such a dangerous act on its own. Yet still, Malcolm was there. He still was there in his speeches, speaking the truth. And his truth came that, now imagine, like I said, that Aries is an ancestral rage. But when you get that Aries fire controlled, focused, and structured, MalcolmX word becomes a precision sharp tool. A precision sharp tool that made people listen and made people begin to see and move forward in a different direction of who they were. Because you have to remember, his mother taught what Black sovereign was. So he spoke about Black sovereignty and the importance of who we are and what we deserve. And you can even, if you even remember, he went, I believe it was the embassy. It was human rights. He knew how we were being treated. And he was like, no, we deserve human rights. We deserve to be protected. We deserve to have rights. And with that, when he went to the speech, when he had speeches or when he had interviews, there was no way they could have disputed his words of what he was speaking. They knew he couldn't be, it was not irrational. His questioning, his points, they couldn't have been irrational, because every conversation they had with MalcolmX, he met them and he went over the top. He went to make them aware that the knowledge of the black man was not the knowledge, the intellect, the black sovereign, the rights that we had. We knew who we were, and his voice was so strong, his communication was so strong. And this kind of reminds me of when I was listening to his audiobook, and when he was in prison, he began wanting to be a better speaker, because he realized at that point in time his cussing and everything was weak. He felt like, I want more to say. So he began using a dictionary. So with that dictionary, he started looking up things. And I think you can see also in the movie, he's with, I think the character in the movie and also in the book was Bibby. I'm not sure, but he was showing Malcolm like, okay, look at this word, see what this word means, and start kind of teaching Malcolm about the etymology of language, what it means, where it comes from, and how powerful it is, and we have to be aware of that. And that and definitely helped to make his speeches even stronger and to be a force when he spoke. A movement, when he spoke, there was a movement at each and every time. Not only a movement of, okay, we're going in this direction, a movement of thought, a movement of people thinking, a movement of people evolving. And that was powerful just in itself. So in the soul's communication, we see the importance, we see the fire of MalcolmX words and how it moved many of us and many people. Now, in the fourth house, the soul's root, we're going to kind of slow down here because this house is an important house. Why? Because the fourth house is the maternal line, the foundation, the land, heavy, deep, emotional, of the maternal lineage. And in that fourth house is the moon in Aries and Mercury in Taurus. However, that moon in Aries lands on his IC. What is the foundational, the bottom, like, of the chart. And that is very personal chart. And that I feel like is heavy because this is where we bring in Louise Little again. So what I want to do with Aries again. Remember, Aries is a sacred flame. Remember, Aries is very strong once you get it controlled. Aries can be an ancestral rage that can be destruction, or it can be ancestral flame that becomes sacred and a movement and a sacred tool to use to change things. And with that moon in Aries, this really speaks about his mother, maternal line. So with the IC is the deepest point of the chart, the ancestral floor for which everything grows. And to understand the moon in Aries, we have to, like I said, go to Louise Little and who she was. And there is a little bit, I'm going to give you a little small biography, but there's so much more meets the eye to Malcolm's mother, to this woman. First of all, Louise Little, she was, I'm trying to remember the story of her. Let me see if I can remember it. Hold on, y'all. Because we're going to take time to get Louise Little. Okay, let me get it together. Louise Little was born in Granada to Edith Langston, a woman whose beginning was one of violence. Her mother beginning was one of violence. Edith was raped at 11 years old by a Scottish man named Norton. This is where the lineage meets its deepest wound. However, Edith was raised by her grandparents. Her grandparents were free African Nigerians. So therefore, she knew what freedom was before she came to the United States, and they were telling her she was not free. Moon Aries also can show the history of Malcolm, because in that we talk about his father, Earl Little. Earl Little also was a civil rights pioneer also, and he was a part of the, I believe it's the Marcus Garvey movement. And Earl Little was murdered. And once he was murdered, they also attacked his family after that by removing Malcolm's mother away from her children for 25 years. And that was the actual social worker, the government that felt that she was not fit to be their mother any longer. And to be honest, they had no evidence of that anything improper, she was doing anything improper as she was raising her children. So let's understand it was 25 years that this woman was away from her children. Now, within that 25 years, they knew what they, now in that 25 years going away, they knew what they were doing. They knew they were breaking up a root of a family. They knew they were breaking up a root of a foundation. They knew to take away a mother is to scatter her children. However, they could have not done that because she had already installed in him. She is installed into them. She is already finally put into them the knowledge of who they are with no questions. And also, we also have to remember, because in the autobiography of Malcolm X, he speaks of how he remember going to the I believe, if I'm pronouncing it right, Garvinite, Marcus Garvey movement. He remember going to the meetings and everything of people speaking and about black finances, black land, all the different movements that many black communities knew they deserved, and they were trying. And the thing about it, they knew they deserved, and they weren't working towards it, because it wasn't that they weren't asking anything from anyone that was working within the community. But let me get back to that, they couldn't break the roots of the family because she already had put it into them, and they knew this was a foundation, this was a root that she put inside of them to help them to understand of who they were, so no one can ever take that away from them, no one could ever define. And even with her not being there, that they will always remember who they are, because I believe even in Malcolm X book, he speaks of how his mother says when they told them apart, don't ever forget what I've told you. Don't ever forget what I've taught you. Because she herself was a beautifully knowledgeable woman. She spoke different languages. Not only did she spoke different languages, I believe she used to write for the people for the Garvinite. She helped to create movements and everything. This woman was very knowledgeable about who she was, so she passed that down to her children. So the separation of her and her children, that did not break them at all, because they already know their root. They knew what they were planted in. Now, as she has taught them this, that Mercury and Taurus, because come on now, Mercury is the communicator. Mercury is the communication planet. Taurus is grounding. That knowledge, that base, ground them into that. Grounding them into that is basically what helped them to be strong, smart about the system and not fall into this system. So therefore, even though the system took them away, they understood of who they were. So her just speaking that to them, her experience of who she was and where she came from, and her lineage also, she knew that she had to install this into her children. She knew that this was the most important thing. So in that soul's root house, that fourth house, it speaks so much, and it speaks so to the power of Malcolm's mother. And she taught them not to surrender to anything. She taught them that no matter what's the system violence, the system had against them with violence or anything tearing their family apart, that they knew what their truths were. And this is the soul root, the fullest ancestral expression in Martin's chart. Because this woman, her family lineage survived. They survived rape, displacement, murder, and institutional removal. And they still was able to transmute that sacred understanding of who they are, and no one could ever take that away from them. Now imagine going through all that and you still have that strong root and groundness of who you are, and they are not able to shake you. And you could see that in Malcolm in the movie and the things that he did, as he was in his life journey. He still continued. I mean, pay attention to the movie. Malcolm X had many phases in life that he was moving through before he became Malcolm X. And even when he was assassinated, he was going into another whole total different level. Okay. I don't want to be too much in there, but that is a very, very strong placement there. of a planet foundation that was held very tight with her. Now I'm gonna go into the soul's creative in the fifth house. This is where basically we speak of creativity, joy, kids, and sometimes, and also within the fifth house we talk about basically the part what the ancestors were denied, what the ancestor was denied, like joy, truth, because of the systematic, the belief that the structure that was surrounding them, that they cannot have this, they cannot do this. Now in the fifth house is basically Sun in Taurus and Venus in Gemini coming in together, having this conversation and this energy. It's basically a reclamation. They reclaimed their joy in this house. They reclaimed who they were in this house. And it wasn't by materialism. It was by knowing who they were through their joy, knowing who they were in their groundness. Because remember, the Mercury and Taurus in the fourth house, that's where the groundness of knowledge of who the family was. Then the Sun in Taurus comes in. I feel like that's their father also showing who they were in that Taurus grounding with his work and what he stand into and what he put in. Remember who you are. Not only remember who you are, keep reminding that is the present for you. That is the gold for you. Not materialistically, financially, but that's the goal for you, because that Venus in Gemini, that comes with your intellect, that comes with you speaking, that comes with you growing and knowing the importance of who you are instead of it being defined by somebody else. So this comes again like when the ancestors were denied as they arrived to who they were. Malcolm lineage and ancestral were like, no, we know who we are, we know who we came from. And this is what I'm talking about, as if like, I'll say for me, I know when I started school and they start educating us about slavery, they just put slavery. And then as I began to learn, I was like, wait, we were enslaved. We were doctors, we were nurses, we were politicians. So and that's the thing that they wanted to take away, the memory of who our ancestral lineage was, the strength of our ancestral lineage and the richness of our ancestral lineage, the empires that we built, the empires that we came from, the kings and the queens that who we are. And with that fifth house, soul's creative, Malcolm lineage, Malcolm speaks of, no, this is who we are. This is who we are. We are not just what they labeled us. Because what they're labeling us, they want us to submit to that labeling. Submit to that labeling and stick to that labeling and not search for anything further of who we are. And they're stating we know better than that. And before we allow that, we're going to show our intellect. We're going to show how we speak. I'm going to speak and I'm going to share that knowledge of who we are. I'm going to speak. I'm going to share that knowledge. So with the Venus in Gemini, this is where it's shaped into something that could travel, that could reach, that could live inside of mind long as the words were spoken. And that's why he had to remind and remind us, remind our community, and I'm sure it was a reminder for him also too, because so many times he had to deal with people trying to make him believe he didn't deserve better, trying to make him believe he shouldn't speak, he in his way was violent, and his way was hurting the community, when we knew truthfully what it was. So with that context, that ancestral lineage and his speaking help us to remember who we were, help us to be in pride of who we were. Now as we enter into the seventh house, the soul mirror, this house is a confrontation and reflection. I always say this house is basically, it shows you basically the relationship that you're in. And within the soul's house, this is the relationship basically where they show how he interacts with the government, how he interacts with those who are claiming other things, false narratives. And within this house, and I'm going to try to break this down in this house, because in this house, he has a stellium of Cancer. And when I see Cancer in the chart, I always think of home. I always think of maternal. I always think of a safe space. And I feel like with the Pluto, okay, with that Pluto in Cancer, he comes in. Pluto is transformation and rebirth. So with that transformation and rebirth in Cancer in the seventh house, this is where let me make sure the families, okay, that is basically breaking up from the the devastation and the hurt of the families, and us coming back through that transformation, like the things that were done to African Americans during slavery, the things that were done to African Americans after slavery, because you have to remember, within the context of their stating, oh, we freed the slaves. However, in that switch of freeing slaves, the slaves became sharecroppers and they were treated terribly. Even people who were free, they still, even though they were free, they still was coming back and putting them as slaves because the laws allowed it to. So it did not allow it for the African community to win. So with Pluto, it's about restoring what was lost, burning it down. And when it burns, you come right back again, and you come stronger with that truth. You come stronger with a foundation that is new. It is not taking anything old. It is not restructuring. It is saying, no, this is transformation and this is rebirth. And transformation, rebirth, and Pluto, they're not actually anything. Is to build something true in its place, to say what it is. And Mars in Cancer, every time I see Mars in Cancer, I feel like Mars in Cancer, because Mars is the ancestral warrior. And Cancer, again, I say, is home. When I see that, I feel like his actions, his speeches, the things that he was creating was about creating a safe place, creating a safe, not only a safe place to speak, to live, to understand. You and I know what is going on. You understand that there is an understanding here of who we are and what we want to build. Because you got to remember, outside of that, there were people stating that we did not have the right to have a beautiful home. We did not have the right to get an education. We had to fight for everything. So I feel like he created, and when I say he created that, I'm saying because even Malcolm was creating, he came through Islam, but after he left Islam, he was creating another network. He was creating another community movement in which he was able to help the community to grow, the community to receive what was needed for us to be our full potential. And that, I feel like that is where Mars in Cancer is. And Mars in Cancer, I want to explain, it is the love of the community. It is for the love of the people. It is for the love of humanitarian to have what they need to receive to grow. And with Malcolm in his book, when they were going through the situation with his mother, and then removing his mother from the house, from her children, and splitting the children up into different homes, he speak of that he can never forgive. He can never forgive this country. He can never forgive this government for what they did to his family, because it was like they were putting on they had every odds of everything stacked against them, brick, stones, everything. And that's what they gave us. And then they piled it on to you. And they're like, now let me see how far you can get. So everything, and that's basically where that Mars in Cancer, I feel, from that he saw what they did to his mother, and he was like, if I can remove a brick, if I can remove an obstacle or the challenge just for us to win. Because I feel like in this is telling us, like, they tell us, okay, all you got to do is do A, B, C, and you can have it. Then they move the line a little farther. I'm like, oh, wait, you have to do A, B, C, and then you have to do D, E, F, G, make it even harder. And also with Lilith in Cancer is, I always feel as Lilith is the rebellion, and Lilith in Cancer, I always feel like it's like an abandonment. It's like an emotional suppression. It is like the child that was left out. I don't know why I always feel like that with Lilith in Cancer. And with that Lilith in Cancer in the seventh house, he basically names the abandonment without apology. And this is like Lilith is a cast out energy, the one who refused to accept a diminished place in the story. And in Cancer, named the wound of the collective abandonment. And when he says the collective abandonment, he's talking about the promises that were made to us as African Americans in our community. And one of the promises was, if y'all can remember, after when the slaves, when they were saying they're freeing the slaves, there was, I believe it was 40 acres and a mule. That did not happen. That did not happen. It was a promise, and the government reneged on that promise. Not only did they renege on that promise of 40 acres and a mule, I can't talk now, 40 acres and a mule, he also felt as also it was holding up the mirror for us to say, for him to say to us, don't wait on them to give us anything. Let's build our own foundation. Let's build what we need. And with every movement, he was doing that. He was building, he was creating what was required for us to be a community, a strong community, a steadfast community. I also want to say in that Lilith in Cancer, I don't know if y'all remember the speech. I think it was called the ballot or the bullet, and where he said, I want to make sure I said this right. Well, Malcolm is talking about, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. And that was him saying, we were here. We knew who we were. We knew that we were the builders. We knew we were created. We knew this is our land. No, they're feeding you stories. They're feeding you lies. They're feeding you untruth that they want you to come upon and make you believe, oh, the Savior came. We came and saved you. We can't. No. We were here. We knew what we were doing. And again, let's build this. All their promises, let them have it, and let us create something. And I want to say one more thing. With this seventh house and that Cancer stellium and everything of the Pluto in Cancer, of Lilith in Cancer and Mars in Cancer, I don't know if y'all ever heard this song by Jill Scott. It's called Petition. In that song, she speaks of, I want to trust you, but you lied to me repeatedly. And she also says, I want my children to be smarter than me. I want to have clean water. And these are the things, if you remember recently, years ago, these are promises that has been made and still has not been fulfilled to our community. And this is basically what This is basically what Malcolm was saying. Like, yeah, they made promises, but never was fulfilled. So let us take this and fulfill our promises. And within that, the South Node in Leo is there. And with him saying, let us make these promises, this is, I always want you to know, North Node, first of all, is moving forward in your karmic journey, to something new. And this is with Leo, the light bearer, him stepping into light and him helping to lead the community into this movement of where we're going right now. So with that his presence and him stepping into the light, and he was to be the flame that show others how it also allow it to burn, to say we are here and to stand out. And he was that person leading us collectively. He was that person bringing us together collectively to be able to produce a fertile ground for our own community. So that seventh house, it is so strong, but yet though it's so beautiful, because it comes to say, despite what the mirrors of everything that you have put up against us and what you have said, and it bounced back off, we are here to stay, and we are here to create what we want and what we need. And I love that for the seventh house. And also, I want to make sure, because within that context also too, with that North Node in Leo, then hold on, I want to go back into his chart, because in his chart, that was a Lilith, that was Mars, and that was Pluto. in the North Node, and then the North Node into Leo. And then we go into the eighth house. Now, the eighth house is vertex in Leo. Also, um, I want to say that is Neptune in Leo. Neptune in Leo. So he has a stellium of Leo also too, but it comes from it starts into the seventh and goes over to the eighth house. And I feel like even with that conversation, um the reason that North Node in Leo is there in between that conversation, because he's doing work not only within the community and showing the government that despite your lies, despite your promises, we are still moving forward, and I'm moving as a light bearer and a community leader. As we go into this eighth house is the vertex and Neptune. I feel like within that context of conversation, he begins the Neptune and vertex in Leo. It is doing the underground work, dissolving the false architecture of who is permitted to lead, who dignity counts. Now, first of all, again, vertex is a point. Vertex is a point of a. Let me make sure, because I'm always getting vertex funny. I don't like that one. Because Neptune to me is again another disillusion. He comes as a light bearer with the Neptune, eighth house, ancestral pattern, ancestral. That is the house where you come. They said death and rebirth also too, because that's where you come to put down the ancestral patterns, and you come to create new patterns. You come to me, ancestral. Me back up. To me, the eighth house is the ancestral lineage coming to you to ask you to complete some of the work that needs to be done within the family lineage, whether it's be pain, the patterns that was there that needs to be put down and evolve. It's asking you to evolve all those situations, all those hurts, those pains, those traumas, and evolve to a better space, a better lineage to move the lineage forward. And in Neptune in Leo, I feel like with that Neptune and Leo, again, Neptune comes into as the ancestral. I see it as ancestral mystic. But Neptune also comes all to, I feel like, clear. Because I feel like Leo with that light bear, I don't know why I see like a fog. I see like a fog, and I see him moving through this fog and moving the fog of the false structure that they were trying to put them underneath, and no longer having to live in that false structure, that false pattern that was given to us to what we should stay in, what we should live in. I felt like that was a part of releasing and breaking that generational belief, that generational pattern of being in that fog and believing, oh, they're going to give us this, oh, they're going to give us that. But him becoming the light bearer and seeing and allowing you to see with a magnifying glasses of this is the pattern, and this is what has been promised, and this is what has been done, and we know better. So this is for us to evolve in our own, within our own community, within our mind, within the structure, to move forward in the things that we want. And then like vertex is basically saying to him like, okay, this is your point with this is the point within your karmic energy, your karmic soul path, where you are being the light bearer. And it's so funny that it's there, because that's the North Node is close to that vertex, so it kind of aligns him and puts him into that space where we need you to be the light bearer. We need you to move forward into things. Now, I want to say this also too, because with Leo basically do talk about the inner child. And with that, you have to remember that Malcolm X had a lot of things that he dealt with as a child. He saw a lot of violence. And the reason he saw a lot of violence because it happened to his family. And I feel with that, all those things accumulated that was within his life, he he was able to be a light bearer in healing those things that that did hurt his family, that did break apart his family, that did murder his father, that did take his mother away. All those things, because remember, this is the eighth house. These are the things that I feel like the eighth house are the things that has punched and happened in our lives, the pain, the trauma, the death, everything. And this is where we are able to see those patterns, and we are able to, if we choose so, to say, okay, I'm going to move in this direction to evolve my family. I'm going to move in this direction. And I also want to say within his eighth house, because when he became Islam, I believe because his family was drawing him to Islam, and he also was bringing so many other people also into Islam when it was time, when he did come into Islam, and he was going around and he was getting more members to come in. So he became a light bearer in that aspect also too, because he was like, I want people to realize the lives that they're living, that they can live better lives. So I want to put that in there also too. But I don't want to say too much on that. Because I know I've talked about it, but I just feel like that eighth house is so powerful also too, because this is where he is the light bearer. This is where he bear all the truth. This is where he knows, he's been there, done that, and that's why he's able to help others, because of that inner child experience of his house being burned down, that inner house that inner child experience of the KKK coming to his mother's house and threatening them about his father. So that's how he becomes a light bearer from those issues and situations, and he chooses to build on that and to become the light and to move forward. Now, the last house is the 10th house, the soul's lineage. This is his last placement, and in that house he has Saturn and Scorpio. Always remember, Saturn is the elder ancestor, and Scorpio. Here we come with Scorpio, coming transformation, rebirth, death, and rebirth over and over and over again. But with his transformation and rebirth, he builds over and over again, and he builds again, even though it doesn't have Aries in here. But this is his sacred flame. He doesn't have that rage about what has been done to me. He has that sacred flame of, let me turn it into something that could help, and we turn into something structurally. I always have the same lesson learned, wisdom earned, and that's what he does over and over again. And this requires going into the darkest ancestral material, the hidden wounds, the buried truth, the architect of oppression, and the presence of self, of natural order, and returning with understanding, because that's where that Saturn come in. Because for all that experience that you have, and when we're talking about the experience, we're talking about the experience of I'm wanting to say Martin Luther King, I don't know why, I apologize, of Malcolm X going to prison. You have to remember, he went to prison and he turned over that. He came out totally different. Malcolm X in Islam. When he went to Islam and he joined Islam, then he found out the truth about the leader. And then he went to Mecca and he started seeing so many different aspects of different cultures, people who were in Islam. And then he was beginning his new journey of another community network. And so he was able always, as Saturn and Scorpio, to turn that into those experiences into wisdom, turn those experiences into a built living movement that was happening. And that is basically the soul in Scorpio in the 10th house, because that's his soul lineage. That's what he has built upon. That's who he is. And I want to repeat this again. Saturn and Scorpio is the 10th house. It just uncovered the buried truth. With that 10th house and his transformation and everything that is in his chart that has basically led up to this point, Malcolm X cleared the way of the confusion. He cleared the way of lies. He cleared the way and allow you to know what truth is and who you are, for that next generation to come in forward and to speak and to have his words as blueprint. This was a sovereign bloodline. It just didn't start from him. It started from his mother line, his father, him, and he weaved it into so many others. He weaved it into so many others, and it still speaks. It still rings to this day. And with that, with his seventh house, with his, I apologize, with his 10th house legacy, we know what his legacy is. We still celebrate him today. We still say his words by any means necessary. We still, matter of fact, I think I heard someone said the chicken come home to roost. I remember him saying that. Everything that Malcolm X has done, it is still presently here for us to speak. It's still presently here for us to learn. And he will always remain a sovereign bloodline to the ancestors that we will always connect to and remind ourselves of who we are and what we stand for. And that is in the closing of MalcolmX reading. I thank you guys so much for joining me, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen and to sit here and enjoy this reading. I hope you enjoyed this reading, and we will be having another reading soon. But in closing, always remember the strength of who you are. Always remember your words, your knowledge, your intellect, and the foundation that your ancestors put upon you. And I know this may sound repetitive, but we are our ancestors' wildest dream, and we can come stronger and with more truth and bold more and more, regardless of them trying to bury the seed of who we are in our history. Thank you again for listening to MalcolmX Ancestral Astrology Reading Natal Chart. Until next time, spread peace and cosmic love. Bye now. Thank you.